You saw it. I saw it. The entire planet watching the World Cup saw it. 10 seconds. Maybe less. The broadcast cut away from the pitch in Houston, just before kickoff, to show the room full of video officials sitting in front of a wall of monitors in Dallas. A routine shot. The kind of thing you blink and miss. And in those few seconds, one of those officials lifted his right hand, made a small shape with his fingers down by his leg, and the camera was already gone, back to the players, back to the football. But the internet doesn't blink. By the time Germany had finished putting 7 goals past Curaçao, that 10-second clip had been screen recorded, slowed down, zoomed in, frozen, and shared millions of times. And almost everyone who watched it arrived at the same word. The same accusation. Spelled out in capital letters under every repost. That, they said, is a white power symbol. At the World Cup. On live television. The official says it was nothing of the sort. FIFA has now ruled. And yet, days later, the argument hasn't died, it's gotten louder. So before you decide which side you're on, let me show you exactly what happened, frame by frame, because this one is more complicated than the clip makes it look. Let's start with the facts nobody disputes. The man in the clip is Shaun Evans. He's Australian. He's not some unknown. He was voted A-League Referee of the Year back in 2018-19. He officiated at the 2022 World Cup, and this is his second World Cup. For this tournament he wasn't on the grass. He was working as a support video assistant referee, one of the team of officials based at FIFA's World Cup Broadcast Center in Dallas, watching the feeds, ready to flag anything the on-field referee missed. Before Germany's opener, the World Feed did what it does dozens of times a tournament, it cut to the video review room to show the officials at work. For a couple of seconds, the camera landed on Evans. And in that window, with his right hand held low in front of his right leg, he made an OK gesture, thumb and index finger touching in a loop, the other 3 fingers extended. On its own, that's the most ordinary hand shape in the world. Divers use it to say I'm fine. People use it 100 times a day. So how did an everyday gesture become the first refereeing scandal of this World Cup before a ball had even properly been kicked? For that, you have to understand what that shape has come to mean to a very specific corner of the internet. Here's the part that turned 10 seconds of footage into a global story. In recent years, that OK sign has been hijacked. According to reporting by The Athletic, the gesture, thumb and index forming a loop, 3 fingers pointing up, has been used to symbolize white power. The reading goes like this: the 3 extended fingers form a W, and the loop made by the thumb and index finger forms a P. W. P. White power. And this isn't a fringe theory invented for one viral clip. Back in 2019, the Anti-Defamation League, one of the most cited authorities on hate symbols in the world, formally added the OK hand gesture to its database of hate symbols, precisely because extremist groups had adopted it. So when millions of people froze that frame from Dallas, they weren't inventing a meaning out of nowhere. They were pattern matching to something a recognized watchdog had already flagged years earlier. That's why the reaction was instant and furious. This wasn't a fan in the stands. This was a FIFA official, selected to help police the biggest tournament on Earth, appearing to flash a symbol associated with white supremacy on the world feed. And the demand that followed was immediate. The clip didn't just trend. It moved rail machinery. FIFA's own discrimination monitor, the body whose entire job is to watch for exactly this kind of thing, called for Evans to be removed from the tournament. Read that again. Not a random account. Not an angry mob. FIFA's internal anti-discrimination apparatus looked at the footage and said, "Take this man off the World Cup." That is about as serious as it gets. An official's career, his reputation, his place at a tournament he'd worked years to reach, all of it suddenly hanging on a few frames of low-resolution broadcast footage and a hand held down by a leg. And at that point, the story had a momentum of its own. The verdict, for most people online, was already in. It was guilty, case closed, just waiting for FIFA to make it official. But FIFA didn't make it official. Because the man at the center of it had a very different account of what those frames actually showed. Evans broke his silence in a statement released through FIFA. And his explanation is the hinge the entire story turns on. He insisted he did not intentionally make any gesture or symbol to communicate a message, an affiliation, or a belief of any kind. The only explanation he could offer, he said, was that the movement was an involuntary, subconscious twitch and that he wasn't even aware he'd done it at the time. And then came the detail that made a lot of people stop and reconsider. Evans pointed out that images taken later in the same match show him making that exact same hand movement again and again, while holding a pen between his fingers. In other words, not a deliberate signal flashed once to a camera, but a nervous, repeated tick from a man fidgeting with a pen at a desk for 90 minutes. Suddenly the frozen frame looks different. If you only see the one screenshot, it's damning. If you see him doing the same thing repeatedly with a pen in his hand, an everyday fidget becomes the far more boring, and far more likely, explanation. So which is it? A hidden message, or a man clicking a pen? That question went all the way up to FIFA's disciplinary process. And the answer landed. FIFA's independent disciplinary committee investigated and reached a conclusion: it found no evidence of any breach of the FIFA disciplinary code. No evidence that Evans intentionally made a racist hand signal. The committee also noted that it had taken his statement into account. In plain language, officially, in FIFA's eyes, there is no case to answer. Evans is cleared. And that should be the end of it, right? An accusation, an investigation, a denial backed up by later footage, and a governing body clearing him. Clean. Closed. Move on. Except this is 2026, and this is FIFA, and nothing about this tournament has been clean, closed, or simple. Because a ruling that no rule was broken is not the same thing as everyone agreeing what they saw. And that gap is exactly where this story refuses to die. Let me be fair for a second, because this channel doesn't deal in lazy outrage. There is a genuinely honest case on both sides here, and pretending otherwise would be an insult to your intelligence. On one side, the ADL itself, the very organization that flagged this gesture, openly warns against jumping to conclusions. Their own guidance says that because the OK sign has a long, completely innocent history, particular care has to be taken before assuming bad intent behind anyone who uses it. The pen detail is real. The repeated movement is on camera. Plenty of people online, including some who have no love for FIFA, looked at the full picture and concluded this was a nervous habit, not a coded message. That is a serious, evidence-based defense, and it deserves to be said out loud. On the other side, when you are handpicked by FIFA to officiate the World Cup, when you sit on a live world feed watched by hundreds of millions, the bar for what you flash at a camera is supposed to be absolute. Critics argue that "I didn't mean it" cannot be the end of every conversation about a symbol a hate watchdog catalogued in 2019, and that the speed of FIFA's clearance, case examined, no breach, statement noted, looked less like a forensic investigation and more like an organization eager to make an awkward story disappear. That, too, is a fair point. So here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of all this: a single 10-second clip cannot, by itself, prove what was in a man's head. It can't. The frame shows a hand. It cannot show intent. And we have built an entire week of fury on top of something that, by its nature, is almost impossible to settle from a screenshot. And that brings us to the real story, the one underneath the hand gesture. Because ask yourself an honest question. Why did this clip detonate the way it did? Why was the instant, overwhelming assumption the worst possible one, before anyone had heard a word of explanation? The answer isn't really about Shaun Evans at all. It's about the week this tournament has had. Think about the pile this landed on top of. An opening match drowning in red cards. Empty premium seats the cameras couldn't hide while FIFA insisted the fans were just standing in the concourses. Ticket prices that priced ordinary supporters out of their own stadiums. A VAR offside call where the one graphic that could have proved it never appeared on screen. Cooling breaks that doubled as ad breaks. Another referee, Omar Artan, from Somalia, stopped at a US airport and denied entry before he could officiate a single match. Brick after brick after brick, all in the opening days. So when 10 ambiguous seconds from Dallas hit the timeline, the audience didn't pause to consider a nervous fidget with a pen. They'd been trained, all week long, to assume the worst, and to assume FIFA would try to make it quietly go away. The gesture didn't create the distrust. It just dropped into a tank that was already overflowing. And that is the part FIFA should actually be worried about. Because a fan base that instantly believes the ugliest version of every story is not a fan base you can govern with a press release. When the clearance came, a huge chunk of the audience didn't read it as justice served. They read it as of course they cleared him. Whether or not that's fair to Evans in this specific case is almost beside the point, because FIFA is the one that spent the whole week teaching everyone to expect a cover-up. So let me give you my honest read, and I'll let you tear it apart in the comments. On the narrow question, did Shaun Evans deliberately flash a hate symbol on the World Cup broadcast? The evidence genuinely points toward no. The pen footage is compelling. The ADL's own caution is real. FIFA investigated and found nothing. If you force me to bet, I'd bet on the boring explanation, a fidget, frozen at the worst possible second, by a camera that should never have lingered. But on the bigger question, should any of us be surprised that a 10-second clip from a FIFA broadcast turned into a global accusation of racism within hours? The answer is no, and that's the indictment. This is what trust looks like when it's already gone. Every frame becomes evidence. Every explanation becomes a cover story. Every clearance becomes a whitewash. Not because the audience is stupid, but because the organization asking for the benefit of the doubt has spent 2 years spending it. The football, for what it's worth, was sensational. Germany put 7 past Curaçao. A statement performance buried, once again, under a story that had nothing to do with the game. And that's becoming the pattern of this whole tournament. The sport keeps delivering, and FIFA keeps stepping on it. So what do you think? An innocent twitch caught at the worst possible moment, or a symbol that FIFA was a little too quick to wave away? There is a real, defensible case on both sides, and I genuinely want to hear yours. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. A like genuinely helps more than you'd think, and if you want World Cup coverage that reads the clip instead of just reposting it, subscribe, because we are keeping count of everything going wrong, and the count is not slowing down. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time. And right now, FIFA's moment is being decided 10 chaotic seconds at a time.